Hello, this is Jimmy Stewart, and I'm the co-host of Black Men Speak, and our other
And this is
co-host
Tony
here.
Duncan, your other co-host of Black Men Speak.
Yeah, so we are thankful to be here tonight. Thank God, with everything that's going on. I got a little something in my throat, so you guys have to please forgive me. With that being said, we do want to ask everyone who's watching to please subscribe. We added a couple more subscribers this week, Tom. That's so we can keep the momentum going and
All
continue
right.
to put out quality content that people are interested in. So, if you get a chance, please subscribe. If you see the like button, please click it. Leave us comments. Give us your opinion. We love to hear from you. We will make sure that we respond to every comment and respond to every like in kind. So, uh, any interesting words, Tom, before we kick into the subject matter?
No, I'm just ready to go, man.
Ready to
Excited
go.
for another show.
See that's Tom for you. Just always ready. Okay. Well then, nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. So let's transition in. And so today we're going to sort of discuss, go back in history a little bit, and I wanted to kind of discuss. There were three acts that were passed in 1870 and 1871. They were called some people call them the Civil Rights Bill of 1870, and some call them the Anti KKK Acts of 1870 and 1871. So, but they all deal with the same subject matter. Making sure that the 14th Amendment, which gives freed slaves the right to vote and be citizens, and the exercise thereof was that they were being protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And the other subject, other part of the law, was to deal with the KKK and their foolishness and everything they were doing to prevent blacks from voting, to exercise their rights as citizens. Um, so, Tom, did you get a chance to review the three acts?
I did get a chance to look through the spirit of the Civil Rights Act of 1871, what some people call the anti KKK Act. So it was pretty interesting reading.
Okay, so
And
there were three volumes. Let's give everybody like a brief. Let's catch them up. So the first act was passed in 1870, I believe, in April, and it dealt with it basically prohibited any person or group from wearing a disguise to go on somebody else's property to harm another person. So that was aimed directly at the KKK wearing their hoods, rolling up on people's property and putting crosses in their yard, and dragging men out to lynch them and to intimidate black people. The second act dealt with what did the second act deal with? Oh, the second act dealt with state governments, basically prohibiting law enforcement, the courts, the whole state legal system from from being biased against black folks or freed slaves. And then the third act was Congress' attempt. That was in 1871, so that's Volume Three, and it dealt with making sure that the 14th Amendment was executed, and it gave broad powers to the presidency to deal with it. So he had the right to suspend habeas corpus, which meant that they could arrest you, no legal rights, leave you in jail, no court appearances for as long as the president determined was necessary. It also imposed martial law, which was done in about 9 counties around the South for places where things were really bad. And there were some other rights some rights given to the courts to oversee elections. So basically, it shifted. At that time, elections, even federal elections, were controlled by the states. But this gave the presidency and the courts the ability to go in and oversee not just federal elections, but state and local and county elections also, to make sure that people who had a right to vote could vote. And like I said, it gave the president at that time, who was Grant, gave him broad powers that were unchecked at the time to deal with the KKK. So those are the three acts, and together they're called the Civil Rights Act, the first Civil Rights Act, or the Anti-KKK Act, because that's basically who they were pointed at. So go ahead, Tom. You want to jump in now that we've caught people up on what the three acts are that we were kind of discussing today?
So, I mean, obviously, these acts came into place during the Reconstruction period, and then obviously with there being a backlash of a lot of newly freed Americans, who were exercising their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which of course every free white man had, but obviously the Africans who were recently freed from slavery did not have, and of course in the South, just coming off of the devastation of the Civil War, wanting to reinforce their power, over the newly freed slaves. So, I guess the question is, we can definitely look at this from a historical perspective, and obviously given General President Grant at the time broad and sweeping powers to actually go in and use the national military to do the job that the state militaries were not going to do. So the question would be, far from it being a historical act that gave our federal government the power to enforce the Constitution, let's talk about why that would be relevant today, or the importance of that today. That would be my question in terms of what type of narrative.
There are a couple of things, Tom. That's a very good question, and there are a couple of things that come out that every black person, well, every person, period, should know about that era and what was going on. First of all, you had congressional investigators who were implanted in the South to keep an eye on things because the federal government wanted to know how Reconstruction was going, how things were going after the the military had pulled out of the South. Like I said, you couldn't occupy the South forever. At some point, the Union troops had to pull out, go back to their lives and families, and get on with their lives. So there are all these investigators that were down there who were keeping an eye on things to keep an eye on the progress of Reconstruction. And so the reason that is significant is because if you read the fine print, if you read into all of the details of the acts, these investigators concluded at that time that the KKK was the military wing of the Democratic Party, and that two, it was founded and funded by the Democratic Party itself with the intent to keep white Republicans and black people from voting for Republicans in the South. So that's one of the first significant parts of it, because when people talk about the parties, for instance, I mean, I constantly hear, well, history doesn't matter, and that, whatever you think of the parties today, historically, we don't realize and give credit to our friends, and we certainly don't blame our enemies enough. The second part of the act was the fact that the KKK was nearly eradicated at this time. Grant went through the South with the military, arrested thousands of KKKs, threw them in jail, no court date, and they had to sit there until the government decided to let them go. And sometimes these people sit there for years. The organization was so the fear of that, of being incarcerated with no court date, you can't. There's no way to get out of jail other than Grant saying, "Okay, I'm gonna let you out now." Really scared a lot of people out of the KKK, and like I said, nearly eradicated the KKK up until about the 1910s, so between 1910 and 1920, when Woodrow Wilson came to power and basically restored their street credibility with embracing them. So, and I know there are a lot of people out there that call themselves progressives, but I hate the name. I hate people who call themselves progressives because they don't realize that the father of the progressive movement, Woodrow Wilson, how he set back race relations in America, and for all the skanky things that he did, him and his progressive movement, towards black people. That can never be forgiven. It should not be forgiven. And I applaud the kids up in there in Princeton who are fighting the The fact that Woodrow Wilson was a god on their campus and pushing back to say, hey, he was not a very nice person. Not to black people. Maybe to white people, but he wasn't to blacks. So I think these three acts should be part of normal history that we teach in the schools because they're so significant for how this group came together. They started off as supposedly as a fraternity. They grew into a militant group. The things that were done to counteract them, how we almost eradicated and destroyed this group, only for one man and his brother to literally bring them back into power, and for all of the havoc they wreaked for the next 70 years after that. So we're just now at a point in our history where it is not fashionable to be part of the KKK. That is not something you're proud of. And still, I mean, the government is still doing whatever they can to put this group out of business via lawsuits and incarceration.
Yeah, well, I mean that would be interesting because I would say doing what they can, as opposed to doing what they're capable of doing. So,
well, even the KKK have rights, though,
said
Tom. Yeah, I mean, even the KKK have rights, and then the Supreme Court. I think it took a little while, a couple of years, for the case to make its way through the federal system to get to the Supreme Court. But eventually, the Supreme Court took the case and overturned it, said it was unconstitutional because you just can't throw somebody in jail and leave them there. Everyone, even KKK members, have the right to due process, which means they have a right to habeas corpus. They have a right to request a court grant them a chance to have a court date to be heard, by your and being judged by your peers. So that's a right afforded to all people, even for misdemeanors. So to suspend that and take it away from them, was something that the Supreme Court decided was unconstitutional. So I mean, even the KKK have rights. So you're right. I mean, there's a lot more that we could do to impose on them, but since they have rights also, we should not encourage our federal government to come heavy-handed and to violate their rights. So let's do what we can working within the system, within the legal structure, to put them out of business.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I guess we have so many incidents, and I guess some people counted isolated incidents that have lived throughout the history of the United States, whether we're talking about during the period of slavery, whether we talk about Reconstruction or post-Reconstruction, whether we talk about the early 20th century and the resurgence of the KKK, or even we look at the last decade or so, and we look at the number of incidents in our country where you have, for instance, over the last couple of years, the Jewish community has been a significant rise in the number of anti-Jewish incidents. Obviously, there's never really been a downtick in the number of issues within the Black community where they have been attacked, and then obviously the Latino community as well. I'm not saying that they're all coming from one group, but when you look at violence, when you look at sentiments against, when you look at destroying places of worship, when you consider, even though they may not say that this is a card-carrying person or a card-carrying member of the KKK, someone who can go into a temple or in a church in South Carolina and shoot innocent people who are just worshiping, exercising their right to faith. It's we live in a culture of abject violence, Jimmy.
Yes, we do.
And it's really a part of the fabric of the country. The blood of violence is still fresh into the soil of the United States of America. And I don't know, Jimmy, if I can say that that's any different than hot dogs and apple pie. Violence is a part of American culture.
Violence is a part of American culture, Tom, so you're right about that. And unfortunately, will always be a part of American culture. We started this country by going to war with our mother nation at the time, England. We've fought, and I don't know, in our short history, there are other nations who are much older than us, but I don't know if there are other nations that have been at war as much as we have for a country that's only a few hundred years old. Who haven't we went to war with? So we are a nation built on war and violence, and that's probably one of the things that's special about us because we're willing to fight for the things that we believe in. Unfortunately, those who believe in the wrong thing are willing to fight for their beliefs also. And you're right, we may
Yeah,
not have as many, the KKK may not be as prominent as they were before, let's say 1960. Because about the 60s about when they were coming to an end with their free reign to do whatever they want to do with killing and lynching black folks and not having any having to worry about any repercussions or the justice system coming down on them. But you have other groups to replace them now. You have the neo Nazis, you have the skinheads, you have some militant groups out there, little militia groups out there who are preparing for a race war. And it's sad that these people waste their time and energy with this pursuit. But all we can do is to speak out against it, be prepared for it, and when we can get a chance to arrest people and make them pay and have the hand of justice come down on them, I'd say no mercy, no second chances. Not that I don't believe in redemption, because I do, but there are some things that you shouldn't really be given redemption for, and this may be one of them.
yeah, I would say that, and violence and assault against children in particular.
Yes, that would be true. So a few years ago, I was sitting at a All Shucks. It's not to say anything bad about them. They're a fine restaurant and chain. But I was sitting at the counter, and next to me, well, a seat in between, was a Klansman. You know, he had all the tattoos, and it was a summer day, so I mean I could see his arm was all tattooed up with KKK stuff and um, the Nazi symbols and everything else. And then they happened to have the football game on. University of Texas was playing. So at that time I was a big Texas fan. I may return. I'm a bandwagon Texas fan now, so I'm not a diehard. Um, so I may return if they start winning, get back on the winning track. But anyway, this Klansman is sitting next to me, and we were both watching the game, and we started talking. And so basically, we started talking about football first. What was the coach who was there? Charlie something. I can't think of the black guy's name.
Charlie Strong.
Yeah, so he was a coach at the time, and I was basically advocating that we need to get rid of him because it doesn't seem like it's working out. And I think he was agreeing with me, not necessarily for the same reason, but I think he may have been agreeing with me because Charlie was black.
Yeah.
So so strange bedfellows there. So anyway, as we started talking, he mentioned to me, he said, "Hey, you may not realize it, but I'm a leader within the Ku Klux Klan." And so I told him, I said, "Well, I kind of figured that either an active member or a former member, because you're still wearing the tattoos." And so then he went on to try to explain to me how the Klan was not so bad today. That his chapter out in East Texas was more involved with feeding the hungry and educating, the poor whites, and basically standing up for their race. And he said, we shouldn't be persecuted or prosecuted simply because we are pro-white. You see, there's other groups like black folks who are pro-black, and you guys are not scrutinized. So I just told him, I said, you know what? It doesn't matter to me. I mean, who you are and what you do is your business. You're the one who have to live with yourself in the end and account for what you've done if you believe in a maker. So we continued to talk, and at the end of it, I don't know, we sat there for maybe about 45 minutes kind of talking, football and some other things. But he said he had moved here to get a job, and he was trying to save up enough money to move his family here. But, when I left, I started thinking that, these are people also. I mean, very misguided in a lot of their thinking, but people also. And even though we made a tremendous amount of progress, and I always talk about the progress our nation has made, the fact that a black man and a Klansman can sit down on lunch counter together is progress to me. But that doesn't mean that our issue of racism has been eradicated, because it happened. It has not. And I don't think it ever will. So we should give up on trying to totally eradicate racism like some of the old civil rights heads talk about, like Jesse Jackson, say we got to continue to fight until we eradicate. You'll never eradicate racism. There are always going to be stupid, ignorant people in the world. And as long as stupidity and ignorance exist, you'll always have racism.
I would agree with you. The foundation of the United States of America was built on racism. It was built on an elitist theology of men of European descent having absolute and dictatorial power over everyone else of any other color, of obviously the two genders. And as a result, it's just like building a foundation to a house. It's hard to replace the foundation of a house. So I would agree with you. Racism, unfortunately, and likely will always exist in the United States of America. But the question is, what is it that we're seeking to achieve? And that is somehow living to the concept that the founding fathers built in the Constitution of the United States, which means that everybody, regardless of their color, of their religion, of their race, or their creed, should have equal opportunity. And the question is finding a balance and creating some type of parity, which I don't want to say is impossible, Jimmy, but when one group of people of one gender has a 500-year head start, and there is really nothing to help tip the balance for other folks who have been oppressed and suppressed during those 500 years, it makes it difficult because, as Frederick Douglass said, power sees nothing without some type of demand. And so the question is, how do you build a balance so that folks who have been oppressed for several hundred years, we're not just talking about 50 years, but one group of people have been infused into the country, but when you talk about a group of people that have been harassed, who have been redlined, who have been oppressed and suppressed from the rights that I won't say that they were given explicitly, but implicitly in the Constitution, bringing that to fray so that, you know what, it's hard to forget about the history if the fruits of that history continue to bear oppression against specific groups of people.
Okay, that's a fair question. So I'll do my best to respond. And so when it comes to parity, parity to me is a mental state. I have no desire whatsoever to be equal to white people. White people are not anything for me to chase or to ascribe to in life. They're achieving some kind of parity with them. Educationally, if I had to say, I would say that I want to be on par with my Asian brethren. They seem to take education and knowledge seriously. They pursue their academic careers with due diligence, and we see the results when we look at the Asian community being the highest wage earners in America because that is built on education. But in social life, and I don't necessarily look at any group out there and say, oh, I have to fight to become equal to you. I just don't think that anybody is my superior in that respect. So I guess I see it a little differently. As for the historically, I think that for the most part, a lot of people have gotten it wrong, Tom, is that we have been dealing with this racism issue for a very long time. And I don't think it's necessarily about racism. If I had to borrow from our frat brother Tony Brown, I think a lot of this is about group survival. If you look at early on, the parties aligned themselves around people not so much based on color or race. They aligned themselves around group interests. So those who had an interest in getting rid of slavery became Republicans. Those who didn't mind slavery and wanted to keep the system in place became Democrats. But in addition to that, the Democratic Party has always held early on that part of their job was to make sure and to ensure that black people did not supplant poor white ignorant people in the South that we call crackers today to take their place on the social ladder. And I'm not sure that the modern day Democratic Party has ever given that up. Or you can speak against racism, you can speak out against the KKK, but you have never ever came out and spoke out against all the things that you've done for group survival to protect the status of white people, to keep them significant enough where that's the aim that you, as a black person or a person of color, would always be working to become equal with white people. Who are they to be equal to? So as
Well,
far
I would agree with you. I don't think it's a matter of being equal to any other group of people. I believe the key is having the barriers removed that prevent us from being able to achieve what we will as a culture. Because I believe as a culture of people, I mean, we're all individuals, and as a culture of people, collectively, we have unique talents, backgrounds, skill sets, and or tendencies. And so I would agree with you in terms of not being equal to any other group of people. When I say from a historical perspective, I guess what I was trying to lean towards is if you've been suppressing through the law, through the enforcement of the law for 400 years, what we're asking for is to, at a minimum, equal protection under a law, under the law.
so I
It's
think we
very
have
clear,
Tom. I think we have
and I
equal
do agree
protection.
with you that folks who have money are going to get a heck of a lot more
Folks who
protection
have
than
money are going to get a whole lot.
I
That's
would
true.
agree with that.
So, but I think we have not necessarily total equal protection under the law, and that is not that is something that we continue to work on. But we have to acknowledge that we have made a great deal of progress. But I'm not totally sure, Tom, and this is my belief. And I'm not. I've never been a Democrat. I've never been active within that party. I don't go to their caucuses or their meetings. I've been to like two in my lifetime, so I can't. I can only tell what I see from the outside, and what I see from the outside is here's a party who is still engaged in group survival. They continue to create conditions in areas that they have max control of. I'm not talking about partial control or some control. I'm talking about they have total control of. And in these areas, all I see is the black condition not improving. I don't see where things are getting better in Baltimore when the leadership in Baltimore has been, for the most part, run by the Democrats, or Detroit, or parts of Philadelphia, or L.A. The policies, this open decriminalizing drug use. Look at the addicts now that are up in and you go to L.A., I see reports and videos of people using drugs on the street openly because the police no longer arrest you for drug use or drug possession, even if you're selling the drugs. There's a certain amount they'll allow you to sell under the guise of personal use and sharing it with somebody else, but you're creating policies now that makes the streets unsafe. And all this destruction, they continue to support destruction policy after destruction policy after destruction policy. How in the hell are you supposed to come up with that kind of system and all the destruction, layers of destruction they're putting on top of you? But now you take a person like me who say, maybe we need to enforce laws and have stronger laws against drugs. Then I'll be accused of not being woke. Or if you say, hey, we need to do something about the homeless. People should just be allowed to live on the streets. Now you're being cruel. Or if you create a welfare system that traps people, generations of people, into a system that steals them away of their progress, of their dignity, of their desires for a better life. That pursuit of happiness is totally taken from you after a while. When you get hooked on drugs, sex, gambling, it doesn't matter, or even welfare. Whatever your addiction is, it is hard to overcome that. And for a party to sit there and think they're doing the right thing by continuing to push these type policies that trap people, to me, you're still enslaved. So when you ask how relevant it is today, I think it's very relevant. I'm not saying you should change parties, but I am saying you should be more demanding of the parties. I saw Joe Biden, just to break off subject a little bit, begging the black folks in South Carolina to come out and vote for him because his campaign is just about dead. And without black support now, he touts, the Obama Biden administration, really was good for black people. And I submitted one way. No one even asked the question, well, what have you done for black people while you were in power for 8 years? That was significant. And the answer is nothing. They did nothing. In fact, they did a couple of things that I still do not forgive either one of them for today, which is cut money for education for black kids and for black institutions of higher learning. So with that being said, I don't know how you're supposed to achieve that whole pursuit of happiness when you have so many people stacking layers and layers of policy and social norms to keep you suppressed and down under the guise that we're helping you. And then in the end, their out is, hey, we're helping you fight against racism.
Well, when we look at that, and kind of going there, a couple of different layers. First and foremost, when I think about the oppression of a group of people, whether you're talking law enforcement, whether you're talking, the KKK in that day, or whatever group it is that is enforcing violence and or oppression against a group of people, I don't think that they're really taking the time to discriminate whether you are left or right-leaning, Democrat or Republican. They just see that you are black. So if they see a kid that's in the street and they want to stop and frisk, I don't think they're going to be asking them whether they're Republican or Democrat. They just want to stop and frisk them. If you have somebody, unfortunately, who thinks that they accidentally went into their own apartment when they're on the wrong floor and shoot a man who's doing nothing but sitting up eating ice cream in their own house, I don't believe that they're discriminating whether they're a Republican or a Democrat. It just happens to be a black man. And so, progress, I guess, relative, I don't know if we've made a progress relative, but I guess if we look at it from today's eyes, maybe it isn't as bad as back then. But at the
Tom, you don't know if we made progress?
In terms of equal protection, I think it's very clear that if you happen to be a part of the mainstream of society, and you happen to be of the majority of what the law enforcement agency looks like, then you're typically going to get more protection than other folks. I mean, even if you look, we talk about Biden, but now we look at what's going on in the Bloomberg campaign that's going back to when he was mayor of New York, and some statements that he's made that, may ultimately end up creating his campaign. He was not speaking about someone who had any political affiliation. They just happen to be minority communities because, as he said, that's where the crime is.
That's where the
They're
crime
not
is,
looking
Tom.
at politics. They are looking at color.
Okay, but Tom, with that being said, so take Bloomberg, for example. To me, he doesn't have to be apologetic for doing whatever could be done, and stopping frisk was very successful with reducing crime and getting guns off the street. For you may not have liked the implementation of it, but you can't argue with the fact.
But the problem is this, Jimmy. He didn't say go to where the crime is. He said the black and brown communities is where all the crime is. Put 100% of your officers out there, stop and frisk at will. He didn't say anything about poor white communities. He didn't say anything. That's to say that there is no crime in white communities, Jim. That's just
okay.
Just not factual.
Now I'll give you that one. That's why I'm laughing. I'll go ahead and give you that one. But poor Bloomberg there, he apologized. He is now catering to black folks. He needs them to get elected. And see, that's my point, is that I want black people to understand that we don't need Bloomberg apologizing for stop and frisk. Okay, if you want to stop and frisk everybody in the black community, we'll take it up in court. But here's what I do want Bloomberg and Biden and the rest of them to understand, is that black people do have some things that they can address. Fixing the poor schools our inner city kids have to attend. If you want to take a name down or a statue down, take Woodrow Wilson off the name of school. This is an embarrassment to me that black kids actually.
One in Dallas, Jimmy. Good luck with that.
I know that you have them around the country, Tom, and black kids go to. Stick Woodrow Wilson into the white community, in the Jewish community, in the Asian community. Take his name off the schools in the black community, because it's an affront to black people to have to send their kids to a school of a segregation in the races who set this nation back many, many years. But now is the time to go to Biden, for the black folks in South Carolina who want to support Biden. Him and Obama, he claimed, did things for black people, which we have no record of whatsoever. But now is the time to tell them, hey, if I support you, you need to support us. Fix the schools. Do something about creating some jobs in my community to help my people out. Because if they can work, they may not have to commit crimes to survive. If they can go to school and get a decent education, maybe they have a shot at the middle class American dream just based on being educated. If you're going to do something for me, do something that matters. Stop and frisk. Who cares about stop and frisk? I live.
Well, Jimmy, a lot of people care about stop and frisk because a lot of people have been, overwhelmingly, as long as we remember, most black and brown communities have been victimized by stop and frisk because it's done indiscriminately in our community. That's why people care about that.
Tom, I have been in that position myself. I have, when I started making some money where I could afford a better lifestyle, and I still drove an old, POS car. Everybody every 2 months I got pulled over. Check my license, my driver's license, my insurance, registration. I got to sit there for 15, 20 minutes, only be told, okay, Mr. Stewart, you can go now. So
And
once,
I can almost guarantee you, Jimmy, they were indiscriminately stopping and frisking folks in Highland Park and University Park. I can guarantee you that.
okay, I'll give you that. So, but since then, I have lived in affluent areas for many, many years now. I'm fortunate. I thank God that I've been able to work and afford a really nice lifestyle. But I have found that since I've moved away from my Oldsmobile, my Ford Escort, um, and my Monte Carlo, and moved to German cars, the Mercedes, BMW, I have not gotten pulled over for driving while black that I can remember now when I drive a better class of car. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily about race or is it about having a looking like you don't fit in to the area that you're now in and creating some suspicion on the part of the police department, thinking that a person who's driving that car really that car doesn't fit into this neighborhood, so maybe they're not here for the best of reasons. So let me go check it out.
Jimmy, on the other hand, if they're not breaking the law, why are you stopping them just because they fit a prejudice profile that you have of somebody? I mean, that person could be going to work. That person could be working at somebody's.
That was me a lot of times going to work or coming from work.
Them the right. Well, technically it does if the law says that. But just because someone doesn't fit into a neighborhood doesn't mean you should be indiscriminately stopping and frisking and or harassing them just because they happen to be in a nice neighborhood.
I don't know about the harassing part, Tom. I agree with you there. But I'm going to tell you, I'm okay in life if the people who are paid to protect me and my assets, if they see someone they think doesn't quite fit into the area that I live in, to at least check it out. Reasonable suspicion, there's nothing wrong with reasonable suspicion. If you see an old piece of crap rolling through your neighborhood and this is not the car that you normally see riding around in your area, I would hope that someone will pull it over just to check it out and make sure it's okay. Maybe if the person was up to no good, that may scare them into not doing what they ever planned on doing because they've been spotted and pulled over. That may encourage them to not do something.
In that vein, if you see somebody driving, let's say you see an old white lady driving a Mercedes Benz or a Beamer or a Lexus through a poor neighborhood, I don't believe that they're discriminately stopping an old lady saying, "What are you doing over here in this poor black neighborhood?"
Maybe they should because that person may be a drug dealer going to pick their money up.
But it ain't happening, Jimmy. It ain't happening to the old white lady driving in the black neighborhood.
Well, how do we know, Tom? How do we know? We hadn't heard any old.
I can guarantee you it would be much hell to play if you had a bunch of old white ladies being stopped in poor black neighborhoods.
Okay. I will give you that. But I'm going to say this, and not that I'm a big defender of racial profiling, but I'm going to say there's a reason why no planes where flights have originated from Israel have been hijacked. And the reason being is because they understand what the hijackers look like. And maybe that's not fair to all of the people who are Arab or Muslim who are flying through Tel Aviv, but they don't let more than 5 get on any plane if they suspect that you are Muslim or Arab. And that may not be fair if you have a family of 6, a family of 8, and you got to split up and take separate flights. But you know what? They're determined that when 5 or fewer on a plane, that if something does go down, that the people on there should be able to take out 5 people. But if it's more than 5, we may have a problem. So that's to say that sometimes it is okay to use profiling as a tool They do it in law enforcement all the time. The FBI have profilers. They have people called profilers who sit there and try to determine what a kidnapper looks like, or what a serial killer may look like, what their background, where they may be, as a means to help figure out and stop this person. So profiling in and of itself is not always bad.
But when it is abused, that's a problem, and it has been abused with reckless abandon indiscriminately in certain areas. That's the issue.
So let me ask you this, Tom. If you were a homicide detective sitting up in Detroit, where the murder cases come flop on your desk every week, just another new stack of 20 or 30. When you have to go to a scene and they've run out of chalk because the number of bodies they have to outline so many. You gonna tell me that you can survive in that environment by trying to be open minded when the majority of when 95% of the black murders in the black community are by black people? You're going to investigate another black murder. You're gonna tell me you're gonna be open minded to the fact that this may have been committed by a white person in that particular? Are you gonna profile and say, most likely what we're looking for is a black person, even without having any evidence of who the person is? You can't tell me that you wouldn't necessarily suspect a black person has committed this crime.
Well, I mean, given the demographics of the area, I mean, obviously that makes sense. But at the same time, what you have to consider is that when you look at how law enforcement in our judicial system exercises the law, indiscriminately, black males are over adjudicated and receive more more time. I'm sorry, not
more
crime.
time.
They receive more time for comparable crimes than other folks. And for what it's worth, basically you're managing the symptoms, which are really the repercussions of a lack of investment in communities. To your point earlier, Jimmy, in the education systems, in the underserved communities, and you're talking about a continuing prophecy. Because for what it's worth, all this is about some change, because you have people who are making money of this sprawling growth in the prison complex in America, and that's really what it's coming down to. There's really no one talking about fixing the problem. There's more talk about managing the symptoms. Nobody seems to want to fix the problem.
Well, Tom, that's where you may be a little wrong. If you look at recently, the Second Chance Act has been passed as a result of states that are implementing the law and is guiding. I didn't believe it at first myself. I'll be totally honest. When I read the outline of what the Second Chance Act was calling for, I thought this was a bunch of left-leaning liberals want to re-engineer the prison system to make it a day camp or something, and I already knew that wasn't going to work. But the reality is that they are giving people a second chance in prison to get an education, to get your high school or GED, to go to college, to learn a skill. And if you do that, there's a pathway for you to get out earlier. The people who are in this system, the recidivism rate is very low for them. In addition to that, because it is low, the state of Texas, who implemented the law just a couple of years ago, instead of building new prisons, they have already closed 2 prisons that they already had, because the number of people returning to prison is being reduced. Now, if you look at this program, it's a different concept, because the guards and the prisoners interact together. The guards are not wearing guns or mace or anything. They play sports together. They sit down and talk. They have chats. They have prisoners who are lifers, who are the career counselors, believe it or not, who will never ever get out of jail, but they're doing the career counseling for guys who want to get out of jail and change their life. So at least their life can have some meaning if they can help somebody from coming back into this lifestyle. So if you go there, you do something to turn things around, you have a chance of getting out. And thousands of people have gotten out of prison as a result of this, who've gotten high school diplomas, learned to be a plumber, or some skill that affords them to earn a living. And then the government is encouraging employers to do what? Hire ex-cons, give them a chance under the Second Chance Act to keep them from having to turn to a life of crime and going back to prison. So you say nothing is being done, Tom. There are things that are being done. You may not hear about them because you'll never hear these things on CNN or MSNBC. I promise you. I watch those channels. I troll them to see what news they're reporting, and they never report anything positive as a result of turning things around because they don't want to have a compare and contrast to those people who are in power who do nothing for black people versus the ones who do something that actually are helping black folks. They do not want black folks to understand that there are actually forces out there that are working on your behalf. And unfortunately, we don't do enough digging into things ourselves to realize who our friends are versus who our enemies are.
Well, it's a good thing, that some of these guys, who have been over prison in terms of the amount of time that they spend, and who've had probably at least a couple of decades of their life taken away.
That is true, unfortunately.
Very wrongfully, and that there are a few thousand, who are getting out. But when you consider that there are 2.3 million people who are in prison in the United States, and about 40% of those are black males, people who look like you and me, and a lot of them, Jimmy, were wrongfully in prison. It's a beginning, but you know what? There is, for lack of a better term, some very heavy lifting that it would take to actually deal with the real crime, which are the folks who are warehousing significant numbers of black men as a permanent workforce for folks who are making a lot of money, some of them being politicians.
A lot of money.
When it comes to corrections, you have folks who are kind of in two general camps. You have folks who, generally speaking, are committed and are building programs for reentry. And then you have this other camp who basically are warehousing folks so that they can make money from the prison and law enforcement complex. And so, for what it's worth, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that this has been going on for 3 to 4 decades, 3 to 4 going on decades now.
Time's been going on for a couple hundred years in our country.
We have made it quite legal to indiscriminately warehouse large groups of people, more so than any country in the world, including Russia, including China, including India, and countries that have X factors more people than the United States of America, and it is a part of the culture. Now, we can find plenty of money to go to war. We can find plenty of money to exploit certain economies, but when it comes to investing in the education of our children and our children's children, it's just kind of strange we can't ever find that kind of money, but we can find billions and or trillions of dollars in order.
Why should anybody find that money when the people do not fight to have their kids educated? Why would any school district fight to go out and get the money to put into poor areas and poor schools, even though it's the right thing to do? But why would they do it when the people who,
Jimmy,
the parents of those kids do not fight?
The United States, the greatest investment you can make is in its people.
I know, we know that, Tom.
And when you look at the next 25 to 50 years, we've already lost that race now, Jimmy. We've already lost that race. For the next 30 or 40 years, when we look at what's happening in China, when we look at what's happening in Japan, when we look at how far advanced they are in technology when it comes to education. I mean, there are more children in China who are, what do we call them, Jimmy? Folks who are in accelerated programs in China, and I'm not thinking of the name of it. There are more children in honors programs in China, 1.4 billion, mind you, than there are kids in school in America.
That's true.
When you have kids from India, China, Japan, other countries that are literally wiping our kids' heads when it comes to science, technology, engineering. Jimmy, if we cannot figure out that if we don't invest now for the next 20 to 30 years, we've already lost the race.
Okay, Tom. So here's a solution. This is what the powers that be have come up with. This is how I see it. Is that when a child cannot make it into an honors program in China, but their parents have some money. They send their kids where? To America to go to school.
Absolutely.
When really smart kids from Vietnam and Malaysia and other Asian countries who are fortunate enough to be able to scrape together some money to send their kids to school in America, they do that. We don't get the cream of the crop from China. China gets the
I
cream of the crop
understand
in
that,
China.
Jimmy.
We
And they're still dominating the best colleges in our
Yes, they
school when
do.
it comes to engineering, when it comes to technology. And I understand these are not the creme de la creme
This
of
is
those
not. That is
countries.
not. We get their rejects, and their rejects come over here and kick ass. This is why if I have to achieve parity with anybody in any level, I would say we need to be fighting to achieve parity with the Asian kids who come here and who take education serious. You're right. We need to be competing with China on a level where we compete with China. But we are now accepting the fact that we're going to need Asian kids coming to America and hopefully stay in America once they're degreed and been trained to fuel the knowledge power that we're going to need to continue to compete. And what I'm saying is that I see this on a professional level in the IT world, in the world that I operate in as a business and as a profession. More and more H-1B visas are being approved and authorized at a higher level to import the talent that Microsoft and Sun and Oracle claim that, and the Googles of the world claim that they can't find here in America.
And
So
Jimmy, that's my whole point. The question would be, why weren't we investing 20, 30 years ago? That's what we have to do because we weren't making those investments 20, 30 years ago.
Well, we
That's
weren't
where
making
we are
them.
today.
And on top of that, Tom, we're still not quite making them, not in all of the areas of America. There's some places, little pockets here and there where it happens. But on top of that, if you live in an area, I don't care if you're in a poor district or your kids go to a poor school, that does not mean that you can't get out there and fight for a better education for your kids. When it comes to resource allocation, you should demand that the least among us are at the front of the list. It should be almost like the NFL draft. The worst team in the NFL draft gets the first pick. The second worst team gets the second pick. The team that wins the Super Bowl drafts last in every round, unless they do some trades to trade those positions away. The worst schools in America should be at the front of the list for its resources. The best
And
schools
it's
in
the
America
exact
should be at
opposite.
the back of the list. So
And it's the exact
it
opposite.
is the exact opposite. But until people stand up and start fighting, demanding more, and unfortunately, Tom, we have been so wrapped up in racism we don't look at anything else, we don't think about anything else. And we shouldn't even care. Just like me sitting at the food counter with the KKK Klansman, he said he was his chapter leader. But who cares? I don't care what you think about me. Who are you for me to even care what your opinion of me is? But if you're going to interfere with my kid getting a good education, that's what I care about. So black folks need to change their priorities up and stop being gamed over racism and get to start fighting for what's serious. Fighting for better schools, fighting for jobs and economic investments in your community, and in demanding that the black upper middle class and upper class actually give something back. Don't always expect white folks to come and invest in your community. If
Well,
you
I mean, I would agree with you that you shouldn't expect anyone who already has power to invest in their community because they're benefiting too much from what they're gaining from their community. But I will say this, in terms of at least two areas that regardless of the class, regardless of what area of the country you are from, regardless of how kinky your hair is or how light or dark your skin is, at least two areas that regardless of the politics, regardless of the religion, regardless of anything else, that we should be able to have an agreement on is education and economics. And when I say that, I mean the best education for your children, number one, and then building economies that will create jobs for our folks. Because again, we are the only culture of people that does not have a significant economic infrastructure in order to provide a massive number of jobs for our own people. And if there are two other areas, I'm not concerned about Democrat or Republican. I'm not concerned about Catholic or Baptist or Protestant. What I am concerned about is that if we don't fix the fact that we are not creating jobs for our own people, if we do not fix the fact that we've got to demand the best education of our children, regardless of whether we went to Harvard or whether we didn't go to college, there's going to be hell to pay. We're already paying hell. But there's going to be even more hell to pay if we don't fix those things, because if we don't control jobs and we cannot find a way to continue to control jobs for our people, and we don't have the right education and or the track that is going to allow our children to build jobs and create jobs for our community, Jimmy, we might as well forget it.
Well, Tom, you know what? The first two we can agree on. That third one, I disagree with you on that one.
Which is the third one?
The third one was politics. You said
no. What I'm saying is the two areas that we should be able to agree on, regardless of the politics.
I agree with you on those two.
Education and economics.
I agree with those.
I said regardless of politics, regardless of religion, regardless of what area of the country, the two areas across the board, from what region of the country, what your political affiliation you are, whatever religion, or even if you are an atheist, it doesn't matter. We should be able to agree on one, education, and two, economics.
Well, Tom, I agree with you there 100%. And we should all demand this from the school districts that we live in and support. But if you don't speak up and fight for these things, like for instance, I'm a firm believer that competition makes things better. It helps us identify the weak. I mean, you're in sales. You've been in sales a long time. I think you may even still be involved in the National Sales Network. Is that the name?
Correct.
So where you teach people to go out there and compete for sales, for business. That's what the people who are really good at it, who are very successful at it, are the ones who get ahead, and the ones who are not good at it for whatever reason, they have fears and trepidation and things they can't overcome, then they fall off the board. But at least that process helps you identify the strong salespeople from the weak salespeople. And by having some competition with the schools, will help you identify the weak schools from the better schools, the ones that can climb up out of a hole and do better versus the ones that are not. Now, my sister-in-law, she's one of those people who's been an educator for a very long time, but she is one of those specialists that go into failing schools and get them turned around and get them off the Texas fail list and get them on one of the PUS lists or positive lists or non-failing lists for school districts. So I know it can be done, but on top of that, what I don't like is that the state has to identify a school that's failing and then send the specialists in to help turn it around. But the people who send their kids there don't demand this. All the failing schools should be demanding these resources to get their school turned around. Not sitting around waiting for some state bureaucrat to determine that your school is not suitable for their dog and then decide to send somebody else, send a group in to do something about it. So
Jimmy, you're right, but in a lot of cases, Jimmy, these folks, they don't know what to do. They don't know the how part.
Tom,
and the reality
I'm not believing that.
If I can't speak for everybody, but if they have been, it's just like someone.
Tom, how do we get so many people out for Black Lives Matter?
Living on government assistance for 3 or 4 generations, that's all you know. You don't know what else to do other than government assistance.
Black Lives Matter when they are protesting.
Unless there's intervention from the outside, all you know is a government.
Tom, that's not true.
Your mother, and you are on government assistance.
When you get tens of thousands of black folks to show up to march on parades whenever there's a white cop and a black individual incident, they don't mind getting out protesting, tearing things up, burning stuff down. So when you tell me that they don't know how to do stuff, I don't agree with you. You know how to protest and act a fool when it comes to some black person having an incident with a cop and being on the wrong end of it. But then you gonna tell me when it comes to the educating of your child, Jimmy, this is somebody you produce, somebody you know and love. You are silent. You don't do nothing.
Folks, Jimmy, who are activists, and these folks who are activists, and these folks who are protesting, I can probably bet you that most of these folks are not the folks who are sitting there who don't give a doggone about the state of education of their children and more. But these are folks who are typically on the other end of, 1, being an advocate for education, 2, being an advocate for economics within their communities. Folks who don't care about their children's future usually are not the type who are going to be going out protesting. They're
Okay.
going to be sitting at home watching TV, Jimmy. They're going to be watching soap operas.
Okay. Well, Tom, you know what? We're running out of time. We're already over, which is okay because it was a good spirited discussion. So I'm going to challenge you for next week to come and if you'd be willing to do some kind of presentation or knowledge sharing on selling. I think the sales career, I think the sales force is something that every business needs. That without selling, that's the lifeline of your organization or your business. And if you don't have people who can sell and bring the money in, then you don't have a business. So every business
True.
needs salespeople. So we've talked about doing some positive things in 2020 to help people out. So I think this would be a good positive one. So I think you're, forgive me because I was only active in your organization for 1 year and I kind of dropped out a long time ago. But your national sales network, I know y'all do some great things. You have chapters around
Right.
the country. You have a training program that you put on, a lot of knowledge transfer. So maybe next week, if you can come and let's encourage the folks not to be scared of going into sales and what they can do to get into sales, improve their skills, and become one of the champions in sales. And when you're a champion salesperson, you can write your own ticket.
True.
So can we get you to come on next week and say a few words? And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fine. I mean, we can definitely talk about the profession of sales and perceptions, perceptions and reality of sales, and just kind of go through some dialogue on, and again, there are a lot of different areas that you can go into. We can definitely talk a little bit more about that, and more importantly, why is that so important within our community in
well,
particular?
the
If
young
we're
people
going
gonna
to
want to know
build
about how much
economies,
money you
if
can
we're
make,
going to
Tom.
grow businesses.
Well, the young people are gonna want to know how much money you can make. So be prepared to talk about whether this is lucrative or not. Because I've read some books on some salespeople that did not finish high school, didn't finish college, um, but became champion salespeople, worked with different companies, but are multimillionaires just
Yeah.
off their ability to sell. So okay, so let's wrap up, Tom. We're going to ask folks to support our our sponsors,
Mm-hmm.
which one of which is my company of MOTC Telecom.
MOTC Telecom.
Yes, we want to give a shout out to Fitness 360 down in Dallas. With their health and fitness wellness programs. My daughter's starting to do online business for hair. She's calling it Queening. It's called the Queening Hair com. It's going to launch in a few weeks in the early part of March. So, and we certainly would like to give shout outs to other businesses who may be interested. Feel free to reach out to myself or Tommy, and we will be glad to give you a plug. Uh, what do you have? You have anything for us, Tommy? I'm going to give you the last parting words. Then we're going to go ahead and call it a night.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I want to thank everyone who is listening live. I want to thank everyone who is listening after live. We welcome your comments. We welcome your thoughts. We definitely welcome your recommendations on topics that you'd like to see us discuss in the future, and or quite possibly join us during the conversation. We enjoy what we do. Obviously, we're very passionate about what we discuss, and again, we are not a monolithic community, just like we're not a monolithic society, but there are a few things that we should be able to all agree upon, for our posterity and the sake of our children and our children's children. So I want to thank everyone who has joined in and who has dialed in, and we look forward to seeing you on the next show.
Yes. Um, Also, Tom, we got a special surprise for next week. In addition to the sales information that you are going to share, I'm going to make a special offer to some young person who wants a chance to get ahead. And if they will follow the sales advice that you offer, then I'll see what I can do to open a few doors for that person. And we're going to see what we can start doing to turn things around in the black community. So we're going to
Sounds
stop
great.
talking and crying about it and start doing something about it. So we are doing things in 2020.
All
So,
right, I agree.
all right. So with that being said, thank you. We'll see you next week, 9 p.m. Central Time.